I'm glad to be with you. Uh, what I'm doing today is just really expository, and as opposed to making a policy argument. I mean, often in the Senate or in conversations that I have, I'm making or hearing a policy argument. What I'm doing today is just sharing information, and the information's a little bit hard to get. Not that it's not entirely public, it's all public, it's all from public sources, but it's just hard to sort of get a good breakdown on it. And I'll share this. This morning, I realized, this data is a year old. I better check as to how much it has changed. I was prepared to come and just sort of wave my hands and say it probably hasn't changed much, but I decided I really ought to check. And so I did check, and I went to I thought I'd use Anthropic AI to update it. And so I said, what's the latest information on the breakdown? I actually did gas rates before I did electric rates. And Anthropic came back and cited my post as its source for its information. And I said, come on now, are you giving this back to me because I wrote it? Or are you doing this based on my search history? And in fact, it turns out my settings on that are such that it has no idea who I am really when I'm interacting with it. And it said, nope, it's just the best source out there. This stuff is not actually presented in a way that's very transparent in many places. I do think Bob Rio has done some stuff since then that's pretty good. But what I'm going to share with you is I'm going to put the link in the chat just so you have it. Everybody's got it. Let's see, where is that chat? Boom. This is a post on electric rates, but I'm going to walk us through what it was helpful for me to understand. So what are we going to learn? It's about what are the components of our electric rates and how have those changed? If you get your electric bill, there's a supply charge and a delivery charge. And then if you really get into it, there's like 15 or 20 components of the supply charge. And what do those things mean? And how do they relate, if at all, to policy decisions that the legislature controls? Again, not examining those policy decisions themselves, just trying to understand how they're reflected in our electric rates. So from there, and I do want to underline that if somebody has a question, I hope that they will get Arnie's attention, either through the chat or putting their hands up, and that he'll interrupt me because I do want to make sure that I'm being clear. And if one person's confused, probably other people are confused. So please don't hesitate to stop me if I'm not being clear. So I'm going to share screen. And
Senator Brownsberger, we already have a question from John Gregory.
Okay.
John?
Yes, hi. I live in a town called Lakeville, which is served by Middleborough Gas and Electric, a municipal light plant.
Yep.
Will the presentation and the rates include information on MLPs? Thank you.
No, it will include a little bit on an example MLP, which is Belmont, but that's it. It's limited in that respect. I'm focusing primarily on Eversource. So that's, I mean, it's a good question, and I will come back to the question of how these rates tend to differ in a municipal light plant, because we can talk about that in a generic way that I think is probably accurate. So I'm hoping that everybody has a chart in front of them that says components of Eversource N-Star electric charges, dollars per kilowatt hour, 2015 to 2025. Is that true, Arnie?
Yep.
All right. So first of all, let's just talk about units here. Power is delivered in kilowatt hours. So, a kilowatt is a unit of power. And, power is sort of, the force and velocity at once. So that, if you're revving your engine up high, you're delivering a lot of power. And if you're doing that over a period of time. You're driving your car a long distance. You're using a certain amount of energy, and so it's power over time, or power times time rather, power multiplied by time. So kilowatt. Can people see my cursor, Arnie?
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah. So kilowatt, kW hours. So dollars per unit energy. And how much is a kilowatt hour? How much energy is a kilowatt hour? Well, a typical home might use 500 kilowatt hours a month. And to give you a sense, a microwave on full blast is about a kilowatt. So a microwave running on full blast for an hour might be about a kilowatt hour. A heat pump, depending on the power of the heat pump, my own heat pumps run at about 1 or 2 kilowatts. So if they're running for an hour, that's 1 or 2 kilowatt hours. But the typical home that does not use electricity for heating uses 500 to 600 kilowatt hours per month. And I would underline that that's probably a low number because that includes homes that are apartments. If it's a single family home with a lot of rooms and lights and appliances, it's going to be somewhat higher than that. So it might be 600-700 hours per month. But the rates on our bill are expressed in dollars or cents per kilowatt hour. This chart presents them in dollars per kilowatt hour. So let's just look at one cell. I hope you can see where my cursor is. It's on the far right under 2025, and it's hovering over the supply charges. That says that. Is there a question? No. Somebody's off mute. But the supply charges in 2025 were about 13, or $0.13645 per kilowatt hours. That's 13 and a little bit more cents per kilowatt hour. So the supply charges, these yellow bars, these yellow components of the bars, represent the wholesale cost of electric power. So those are the way our utilities are structured. NSTAR or Eversource or National Grid, or for that matter, most municipal utilities buy their power from wholesalers. These are wholesalers who operate electric generating plants, gas plants, oil plants, solar farms, wind farms. But usually they're packaged. There's a complex mix of those things being purchased by any given utility, and the rate that is approved in 2025 was $13 cents per kilowatt hour. And I'm hovering over there. Now, I just want to draw your attention to the fact that if you go 10 years back to 2015, the supply charges were higher. So supply charges, the yellow component of our total bills, has not gone up. Supply charges have, fluctuated, but overall, they are, they've trended down. Another thing I want to say about the supply charges is that these are Eversource's basic rate supply charges. Most people today have opted into some kind of municipal aggregation program, or perhaps some third-party aggregation program, and they are probably paying somewhat less for supply because Eversource can pass through supply charges from whatever vendor people choose, whatever supplier people choose. So these are kind of illustrative. They're not what most people pay. But they do reflect the fact that they do make an important statement that supply charges per se have not gone up. Gas prices are the largest component of our supply charges, and natural gas prices have not gone up in a big way.
Senator, before you go on to
Yeah.
the next component, there's a question from Lisa Cunningham
Yep.
asking if the charges that you're showing on this graph reflect the new winter heat pump rates that were instituted this season.
They do not. They do not. These do not reflect the heat pump rates. This chart is from 2015 through 2025. And those are January 1st dates. So this trend is about a year old, but this part is pretty stable. I'll update you on a couple of things that have changed as we get to the end of the presentation. All right. So the second component of the charges is general delivery charges. And so that's the cost of taking the power from its source to the service junction at the side of our house. And that's comprised of a combination of long distance transmission charges, which are sorry, just killing that phone there. I'm going to turn this off. The delivery charges, which are somewhat less than the supply charges here, but on your bill might be more, are the cost of carrying that power over long-term transmission lines and local lines. Now, what you'll see here is that cost has gone up over the past 10 years. And we'll break it down a little
That's the
further
blue.
with the components further down.
Yeah, I see that. Okay.
So those are the two biggest categories of our charge, and I'm looking at the 2025 column. But I guess we'll break this down further in another chart. But the main thing to take away is that the supply charges have not trended up. The sum of all the other charge components has generally trended up over the last decade. Now,
We have a request, and it looks like you've done it here to see if you can
get it bigger.
Make it a little bigger. Yep.
Yeah, does everybody want to see that chart? There's that chart blown up a little bit bigger. And I apologize for having it smaller. So this was on its, we can see our supply charges, the yellow charges, and everything else. The sum of everything else has been going up in a material way. Now, what this chart does, I've made it too big now, is do the same thing, but apply an inflation adjustment. And again, actually, you see the supply charges trending down, and the delivery charges still trending up. Everything else still slightly trending up, although it's a more modest increase. Now let's go and break this down further and talk about the components that we're looking at on this chart. So this is the same data that's in this last bar chart, but converted into in the last bar of this chart, converted into a pie chart. This is as of January 1, 2025. So let's stare at this together a little bit. So the biggest slice, if it's an Eversource bill, it might be a little smaller for another bill, is the supply charges. And what we've seen is that has not trended upwards. That's actually trended a bit downwards. Natural gas, again, is about 75% of the power generation. And nationally, natural gas prices have been flat to down for the last couple of decades. Regional prices have followed the same trend, more or less. The second big component are those delivery charges. The costs of getting the power from the generating source to the side of your house. And that splits into a couple of different components, as noted. There's the regional transmission, transmitting it from a gas plant in Lynn to a substation in Cambridge. That is a bit more than half of the charges. And then regional transmission is most of the rest. This chart doesn't show this detail, but I'm going to represent to you that when you look into the detail, which is in the various attachments to the web post that I shared a link on, the costs for local distribution have risen only slightly faster than inflation. To the extent we saw increases in this delivery charge, in this blue bar height, that is due primarily to the transmission charges. Cost of transmission has been going up as we've added new sources and had to add new components. Transmission charges are not something the state controls in any way. Let's talk about how the components are regulated. Local delivery, the local distribution, is what the Department of Public Utility regulates. That's the main thing that they are really going to scrutinize is, are the charges reasonable in light of the costs of actually providing that services, both operating costs and capital costs, maintaining the wires that deliver the power out to you and to us, and the transmission, transformers. Excuse me, I used the word transmission. Transformers, so the wires, the transformers, the substations, all of that. That's what DPU regulates. Those long-range transmission lines are not regulated by DPU. They're regulated by the federal government. So they're just something we pay according to how that regulation has been determined. And by the way, even the development of transmission lines is primarily overseen by ISO New England. The next component here is the residential assistance component. It's a fairly small component, which is the cost of providing relief to low-income customers. So all of the general ratepayers number goes up a bit to cover the costs of providing discounted rates to the lowest income consumers. Now, there's a small slice, which is grid modernization, and that's to pursue the investments to support a range of things, but it's a small component, and it's really a lot of what, there's a lot of grid modernization that, broadly spoken for, that might be comprised within the delivery charges. So that brings us around to the two green slices here. Now, the green slices here are the two major slices that we in the legislature and DPU, from a policy perspective, can make discretionary decisions on. The decisions that DPU makes over in this area, this is not really primarily a legislative area. This is mostly regulated by DPU. The decisions they make here are basically accounting decisions. They're not policy decisions. The policy decisions are all in this slice here, the approximately quarter of the bill that relates to environmental charges.
Senator, I'm going to just ask you a question before you get deeper into the green area. There's a question from John Gregory. It is, what, if anything, is happening at IOUs to use territory-wide rooftop solar as a source locally instead of using central generating sources?
That's a very broad question, and I'm not an expert on that. But if I understand, the question is, are we using rooftop solar? Yes, we are. Maybe I'm not understanding the question. Of course, there's a lot of rooftop solar out there. Well, maybe the question could be rephrased. I'm sorry, I don't think I understand it.
John, do you Can you clarify?
Sure.
take
If you
yourself
look
on.
at a website called Google Project Sunroof, plug in a street address, and then click the link Data Explorer, you can look at the solar potential for a zip code, a town, or even for the state of Massachusetts. I've done that recently for the state of Massachusetts. And what Project Sunroof shows you is if every rooftop that has solar access had panels on it, PV panels, there would be a certain amount of kilowatts generated from the sun. And so the question is, if you didn't use the traditional generating sources of nuclear, natural gas, or whatever else is out there that's in the rate structure now, and we as a country shifted to rooftop solar wherever possible and practical, how would that change the rate structure? And I guarantee you, it would. My feeling is it would drastically drop the rate structure. It would also make the energy much more local and reduce transmission costs. When you factor in local batteries, now you have distributed storage, which can be called upon as a source of energy in times of grid outage. So does that help at all in terms of a verbal discussion? I'll go back on mute. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I mean, so you're asking the sort of fundamental, solar vision question is, how far can we go in that direction, combination of solar and batteries? The state's certainly trying to move in that direction. And ultimately, it depends on people choosing to put solar on their roof. And that's, a question of, are the incentives we offer adequate? Could they be higher? And then you have challenges also of, because people can only store so much power in their batteries, they still need grid connection for reliability. If you buy a Tesla Powerwall, that'll get you, about a day of heating in winter. If you were just relying on the power from that and running a heat pump, maybe less than that. And if you were, if you had an extended, like snow on your solar panels, as I did for the past week, I have, just for the record, I mean, I'm somebody who's done the whole 9 yards on this. I have solar panels on my roof. I have PV. I have solar electric, solar hot water from, direct radiative solar hot water. I've got no fossil in my home. But I would not tell you that I could go without grid connection, because solar just is not something that can always be there for you. So you get into a situation where you do have to have the grid. You can't get away from the grid completely with the technology we have today. So it's a complicated question. The state's trying to move there, and the uptake is less than we might think. But we're certainly trying to maximize that. But today I want to make sure that we just get through understanding the electric rates. And so I'll continue down that pathway. So just to recap where we are, we've said that the total rates are, the total volume component, excluding any, the monthly hookup, which might be $10 a month or something, is about a total of 34.8 cents, $3.348. And we're now looking at how that breaks down. We said the largest portion is supply. That's wholesale marketing. It's been trending down. Delivery charges. The local portion of that has been more or less growing with inflation. The transmission costs have been going up. We talked about residential assistance. We sort of glossed over grid modernization because it's a small site. Now we're focused on these sort of policy-driven choices. So let's talk about both of these separately. Let's talk about the portfolio standards. Now, the renewable portfolio standards say that utilities, and this goes to the gentleman's earlier question, utilities are required to purchase a certain amount of their power, an ever increasing share of their power from renewable sources. And that's defined in a complicated way, but in the core of that is wind and solar. And if they, to the extent that, and they might have to pay extra to do that. And to the extent they don't, they have to make alternative compliance payments. And the costs of, or excuse me, or buy credits from somebody else. So, for example, I've had solar on my roof since 2010, and I used to sell renewable energy credits into the so-called REC market, REC, renewable energy credit market. So I would generate maybe a megawatt hour or a couple megawatt hours per quarter, and I would sell the credit for having produced that to a utility who had an obligation to either directly purchase solar from somebody or to take credit for somebody's solar production. And so that's what these portfolio standards cost are. And the cost of doing that, the cost of utilities doing that works out to about 7% of the electric bill. And just flipping back, what is that number? It's about 2.2384 cents. That number does, excuse me, yeah, 2.384 cents or $0.02. So 2 cents per kilowatt hour. And it is about, 7% of the total. I'm going to pause there and let anybody ask a question about whether that makes sense or not.
Senator, I momentarily lost my view of the chat. So if someone else, maybe Mayim, if you can, I know there's about 3 questions pending. Someone can pick up from that.
I can see the chat directly.
Okay.
Yep. So we've got a point about the savings from the winter heat pump rates. I see a lot of policy-oriented questions here, but I'm going to stay with the ones that are sort of mechanical or relate to the expository purpose of this talk. One of those is, how is the cost of transmission as opposed to distribution determined? So again, that is a federal Energy Regulatory Commission determines the cost of transmission, whereas our DPU determines the cost of local distribution. And those are both combined into the delivery charge segment of this. And the delivery charge segment is, it's about half local and a little more than half local and most of the rest transmission. But on the portfolio standards, I don't see anybody asking questions about those. They're 7% of the cost. They're a couple of cents per kilowatt hour, which brings us last to the environmental costs in delivery. So the environmental costs that are built into the delivery charge break down as follows. They are mostly, the largest component is mass save. The second largest component is solar. And then there's smaller charges related to electric vehicle and wind and renewables. So that's as of January 1, 2025. I have updated these numbers to 2026. I've not had a chance to redo all the charts in this presentation, which is several days worth of work. But the mass save energy efficiency charge has been materially reduced. That was what happened last year around this time, when the governor said, look, DPU, you've got to reduce these charges. And the charge level for this reflected That was probably set in November 2024, reflected the expected budget for Mass Save at that time. And DPU came in and said, no, Mass Save, you're going to have to cut your budget a bit. And so the current rate reflects those budget cuts. And so instead of being 3.1 cents or a dollar 0.03, that's 3 cents. Instead of being 3 cents, they are about, sorry, let me flip up to this. They are about, so have been reduced from the 3 cents to about 2 cents to 2.5 cents. So that's about a 15% reduction. That's material.
Hi, Ned, I'm going out for my walk.
Sorry. Okay. The other charges have not changed. The solar and renewable charges have not changed. The EV factor has gone up a bit, but it's a small number. So coming back to this pie chart, this number has gone down from 0.031 to 0.025. So that slice has gotten a little bit smaller. And these charges the other charges have mostly remained the same, except that one's gone up a little bit. The net of it is that the environmental charges are still approximately 50, approximately 5 cents altogether per kilowatt hour, and which works out to. Let me just go back to this chart so you can. I apologize for flipping around. I want to get to this. So back over here, the environmental cost and delivery here, it says this is what they were at the end of 2025, 0.539. They're now 0.048. So it's still around 5 cents per kilowatt hour. All of those policy-driven environmental charges that are in delivery, as opposed to the renewable portfolio standard. So coming back to sorry, I had these teed up and I just want to get back to it. Here's the chart here's the table I want to show you. These are some numbers to kind of put in your mind when you think about this conversation about the costs of our environmental policies. These are, if an Eversource customer who's not a heating customer and is probably a smaller customer is paying, as of January 1, 2025, was paying these two together, the environmental cost and delivery and the RPS compliance, about $500 per year. So that's all those delivery charges, Mass Save, the solar, those being the two main components, were about $342, and the statewide RPS was about $150. So take those two together, you're talking about $500 a year, or about $494 per year. That's for a non-heating customer. The average heating customer would be bigger, and a single-family home with a lot of lights and so forth would be more like this number. That's gone down slightly because of those reductions in Mass Save, but that's still the right ballpark. And these are all ballparks because everybody's a little different and the rates are a little different at different places across the state. But I think thinking round numbers, $500 a year in environmental charges per electric customer is about right. Now, if you happen to be a municipal light customer, your numbers are going to be a lot less than that. It depends a bit on which, it depends a lot on which municipal light company you're in. The charges in Belmont, which actually has pretty green policies, are much less. So instead of being $500 a year, they're going to be more like 80 a year. That was, again, that's a little bit, we're a little bit out of date on that, but it's approximately right. Belmont provides much more modest incentives for heat pump installations, like $1,000 instead of $10,000. I'm not sure what the latest is, but that's the relative order of magnitude. And they spend less on RECs and portfolio compliance. So it is true that for our major utilities that are regulated by DPU, we impose a set of charges which makes them more expensive for the residential consumer. Now that's basically what I wanted to share. I'm not sure it's worth an hour and a half of people's time, but I'm happy to take some questions and hope we could start with clarifying questions about what we've said here, about these cost factors, because that was the goal, was to get this cost information out here. It is information that is relatively hard to get. You really have to dig through some rate filings, and it's not something that's easy for folks to do usually. So I'm pausing there to allow questions. And so Lisa Cunningham, yeah, so gas, I didn't, you said, can you please back up your claim that gas prices have not changed in decades? I'm not saying they have not changed in decades. Of course, they've fluctuated a lot, but the overall trend has not been upwards. Right now, I think what you've got a set of numbers here, Lisa, that highlight a winter peak number, but the overall number has basically been more or less sideways. The best source, and I'd encourage people to check this out, if you really want to get a sense of the long-term spread of energy prices, a great supply reference is the Avoided Energy Supply Cost Report. This is the document that basically everybody looks at in the rate setting process. I've just dropped that into the chat. That gives you a very complete both history and prognosis on gas prices.
Senator, I'm still having a problem with seeing the chat, but I do see two
Okay.
hands up. Karen? I saw your hand up.
Yes, sorry, I thought I got myself on mute there. Hi, Senator. Thank you for taking questions and for your presentation. I guess my question is sort of related to clarifying, but I think it's a disservice to people reading their bills to see Mass Save just as an expense, as opposed to I think it could be the only item on your bill that actually gives back to taxpayers and ratepayers more than it puts out. And I feel like it's really misinforming to have it just look like it's an expense without understanding it in a context. So I'm just wondering if you think there should be an effort to communicate Mass Save's cost in a different way to reflect that. And then I heard that Lisa asked a question about gas. My sense from your presentation was you're mostly talking about people's electric bills, but I just want to clear up that the gas system enhancement program, the surcharge for GSEP is on people's bills and it's visible. But once GSEP gets rolled into the rate base as part of the delivery charge, it is no longer visible, but that doesn't mean that the massive cost of GSEPs disappears. It's just more hidden. So I just want to put that out there in terms of understanding our bills.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And okay. So, thank you. No, that's fair. Let's be clear that what we're talking about is if in this chart, which I started with, and said that, look, I mean, you can see this bar here is the supply, the cost of basic electricity in 2015. I mean, the supply for electricity was 14 cents. In 2025, it's 13 cents. And my statement about that was not that it's remained constant. Obviously, it has fluctuated, nor was this just gas, but this is the overall cost of a blended cost of electricity, and it has not gone up at the wholesale level over the past decade. It's fluctuated, but it was lower in 2025 than it was 10 years earlier, just slightly lower. And my statement about that was that the wholesale cost of gas, which is the major cost of running a gas generating plant, has been flattened down over the last decade. That's different from the cost of gas that somebody gets delivered to their house. And that, of course, as you say, includes GSEP, which is the cost of maintaining the pipes that take it out in the streets to people's houses. GSEP is not in this number here. This is just the overall cost of generating, and that is about, at this point, gas is about 78% of our electric generation, and that the fact that thing is that this trend is down, not up, reflects that commodity prices have generally, for the last decade, been down, not up for gas. So that's that component. Now, you asked a fair question, which is about how you talk about it. So this is there's lots of ways to talk about it, and we talk about Mass Save in a whole lot of ways. And Mass Save is something that I'm a big fan of the Mass Save folks. I think they do a great job, and I've given that a lot of study here about what they're doing. And that's in my sort of heat pumps page, which I'll also drop into the chat for folks. But there's a lot of information here. So I completely agree with you that Mass Save is different than the other components because it is about giving back to consumers. We're just trying to isolate, what is it as a component of what people are paying for, and I'm giving it. My intention today, and what Arnie asked me to do, was to give a very just the facts, please, kind of presentation on how the rates are put together. Yes, Mass Save is investment in our future. I agree, says Ricky Papo.
Roger, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, just one observation that by my kind of estimate and eyeballing things, the absolute increase in cost for a distribution charge and the green charges, or what we call policy charges, from 2015 to 2025, the absolute increase is about the same. I think there are some folks who say that, it's the policy costs that are going through the roof, and then others who say it's the distribution costs that are causing the problem. It seems like they're equally causing the problem, if I read that correctly. Does that make sense?
So you're saying, okay, well, look, delivery charges were 6.6 cents in 2015, and they're 11.8, so that would be 4.2. The environmental costs and delivery have also gone up from 0.15 to 0.53, so that would be
right
0.48. So yeah, 0.38 rather.
Yeah.
So 0.38, 0.42 in absolute contribution. Yeah, the delivery charges are fairly close to the environmental charges. And remember, so you could look at it this way, that we've got a couple things going up. One of them is our environmental charges. Another is especially our transmission charges. Those have gone up quite a bit.
Right. And one last question. That particular spike in total costs and supply in 2023, is that directly related to what happens in the winter market when we have that competition between natural gas supply to homes for heating and to the generating plants and the claim that we need another pipeline that occasionally we'll face again? Somebody who saw their bill in 2023, maybe that's what people are reacting to, is like, oh my God, it's through the roof, as opposed to more recent recently. Is that's not exactly reflected in any way here, except in the average cost that you have. Is that right? And do you see that as a problem? Uh,
So, that's a complicated question. I mean, no, I wouldn't pinpoint that. I can't explain that rate. I can't explain that rate. The thing you're talking about definitely happens, that, is that competition for between heating needs and gas electric generating needs in the winter. And by the way, what we do in that case is prioritize the heating needs, right? Because um, because we can turn to other forms of generation. And when we've had the big cold snap in January, we were actually generating with oil because there's not enough gas out there. Because the priority is to make sure that we're heating people's homes. So people who heat with gas get the gas first. And the electric generators have to turn, to backup fuels, which means oil, which is not a pretty picture. So that competition is a reality that you're talking about. But this particular rate spike, I don't understand that. And remember, that's going to be a rate that's in effect for like 6 months, or several months at least in the winter. And so I'm not sure. I can't put the pieces together for you on why that one's so far out of line.
I've read about that one. If I could jump in for a second,
Sure.
my understanding and what I've heard is that particular spike was largely due to the onset of the war in Ukraine, and that the U.S. then had to jump in and provide gas to Europe, and that put increased demand on local usage, and resulted in a real spike in natural gas prices, which then moderated, as we can see in 2024 and 2025.
Yeah, no, that's probably a lot of it. I'm not sure how it actually smoothed in, but that definitely happened too. And it brings up an interesting thing, is that Massachusetts, when we're buying imported gas, to the extent we're not getting pipeline gas, right? If there's not enough pipeline gas, we have to go to tankers. And when we use tankers, we're buying in the international market. We cannot just buy from other, Louisiana or something. We always have to buy using tankers that are flagged. It's complicated, but the bottom line is we are competing directly in the same market where Putin's blowing things up. So yeah.
John, I see your hand up. You can take yourself on. Yeah.
Yep. Thanks, Harney. Senator Brownsberger, thanks for the presentation today. I noticed in the chat that Mark Dine had a question that is also one of my questions. He was asking, any way to determine how much of the bill is utility profits, and to what extent, over this decade and a half, have those profits become a larger part of this chart, or about the same over time, or has it trended down?
The utility profit share.
Correct.
So the only part of this picture that's really, as I understand it, where the utility profit share is built in is in this blue chart. I mean, to be fair, there's actually a little bit of profit in Mass Save. We give them incentives to run the Mass Save program in a good way. And again, I'm a fan of Mass Save. I do think they do a good job. I'm not troubled by that. This is a pass through. The supply charges are pass through. So most of profit is built in the delivery component, and within the delivery component, it is built. Sorry, I don't actually have a chart that breaks this out, but remember that the delivery component is a good chunk of it is the transmission line. So they're not making a profit on that. It's really this slice here, maybe about half of the delivery component, a little more than half of the delivery component is the part where their return on investment is built in. And that's a deep question, which I don't consider myself an expert on. That's what the DPU scrutinizes, and whatever that return is, and I can't even tell you right now, that's what DPU thinks is a fair rate of return that reflects market realities. But if you look at the rate setting, it's useful. I can't give you a direct citation to it, but if you look at their rate cases, you will find discussions by the Department of Public Utilities on, what they think the rate of return is and how reasonable it is and so forth. But I'm over my head when I really try to opine about that number.
Okay.
There was a question back here that I wanted to get to in the chat, that it said, Senator Brownsberger, you stated that supply charges are not caused by legislation. But if DOR were required by legislation to procure 10 gigawatts of solar, it would have the supply rate from 16 cents to 8 cents. And yeah, I don't, that doesn't sound right to me, but I can't, I know if somebody'd like to explain that. If David Green would like to explain that, I'd be happy to listen.
Yeah, this is David Green. So those numbers are direct and accurate. The supply rate is, as I'm sure you know, these numbers show, is about 16 cents per kilowatt hour from Eversource in Massachusetts today. The UK government just concluded its most recent round of auctioning offshore wind, onshore wind, and solar. And the solar component came in at 8 cents per kilowatt hour for 20-year contracts for supply of electricity to the grid. And I'd just like to point out, I'm English, I'm an American citizen, but I'm English originally. England is about half as sunny as Massachusetts. So I think we could quite easily beat the UK's price of 8 cents per kilowatt hour. But even at 8 cents per kilowatt, that is half the cost of supply. So although legislation doesn't affect the gas price or the coal price or the oil price, those are international markets, it does affect what DOER procures for electricity. And if DOER were like the UK government to run an auction process to procure solar, it would almost certainly beat 8 cents per kilowatt hour, which is half a supply rate, and knock 25% off the retail price of electricity.
I don't know. Does anybody else want to comment on that?
I would. I don't think that we're looking at what we want the future to be. And a small investment in wind, solar, and storage is not only more sustainable, it's cheaper, it's better, it can create superpower that's got a marginal cost of zero. And instead, and it uses essentially our giant fusion battery in the sky to power the world, which it powers anyway,
If I could
cleanly.
Yeah.
also
And
add to
we had
Pamela's-
a meeting just last week on the fossil fuel disinformation and campaign.
In addition to Pamela's great points, with the solar on the rooftops and the batteries in each home, you now have a distributed generation much less prone to grid power outages.
That's right.
So I mean,
More
you
resilient.
yeah, absolutely. And it just,
No.
so, and the comments about Mass Save, I've contacted local Mass Save people, or not local, but they can't tell me how many houses or homes customers have done a home energy audit and taken action to insulate or weatherize so fix that, get the data straight, and then put a program out so you get a much higher percentage participation in the weatherization is to drive the demand down, reduce the demand. The most inexpensive kilowatt is the one you save, right? So, thank you.
Yeah, by the way, I mean, let's see. There's a thing called the Energy Efficiency Advisory Council, which does do a pretty good job. If you, I'm just going to drop this in the chat for you. if you may have talked to somebody at Mass Save who didn't give you good information about what, the number of audits were and the completion rates and stuff, but that information is very much available. So I'm giving you a link to the results reporting page of Mass Energy Efficiency Advisory Council, which is kind of the body that supports Mass Save. And as I say before, I do like what Mass Save is doing. And to the comments about solar, I think I can't price those thoughts, but I definitely, obviously, we all really do want to try to roll out more solar. So I'm with you there. Is Mark raising his hand? There's a couple of hands raised.
Yes.
Mark Dian is one of the most expert people out there. So Mark, I'd love to hear from you if you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks for the presentation. We've been trying to put this together, but you did a better job of explaining what's in the bill than we were doing. So I'm going to copy it. But I do think it would be, first of all, I agree with David on the sort of numbers around solar. They're pretty impressive. They've changed a lot in the course of my career, from this solar being sort of an exotic luxury for people who didn't care what their bill was, to something that is pretty close contestant with what we can do in energy efficiency. And I've posed most of my life into energy efficiency. I do think it would be worthwhile in terms of figuring out what's going on with the bills, and you may have more luck with this than we have had, Senator Brownsberger, is finding out what share of, if you look at your chart, excluding the orange yellow stuff at the top, which is a pass-through, what portion of the bottom below is profit? I think would be an interesting and probably surprising topic, because certainly when we've looked at it for gas, it turns out to be a remarkably large portion of what's being paid on gas. And I would be surprised if it was not a significant band on the electric. If it had a different color, you might be able to find it. Again,
So you're saying within the blue, how much of this is profit?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Within
so
the
I don't
green,
know that
as you-
answer.
Yeah, I don't either. I'm just saying you might be able to get it more easily than I can, you might, by asking the utilities, but they tend to answer you better. Anyway, I just think it's worth doing there because it's a surprising number when at least when we pieced it out on the gas side, it's over 10% of the non-gas pass-through part of the bill is profits. And I know how they're determined. I'm just saying it turns out to be a bigger number than you might think. And I guess from what the DPU has allowed in Massachusetts puts us at the high end of what profits are allowed nationally. So it's not a short-term thing because you have to do a rate case and so on, but it'd be worth sort of illustrating that for the public.
You raise an interesting question, and I'll think about whether I can get to the bottom of that. I know I'm out of my depth on it. I can't comment on it at this point.
I see a hand from Carolyn.
Yes, thank you. And thanks for all the work you put into this, Senator Brownsberger. And I believe it was a lot of work. I think a number of us are a little frustrated because it doesn't maybe have the data that we feel is there and that others feel is there, that make some of the key points relative to renewables. And so my question to you is, what do you think, since you put a lot of work into this, what do you think is the major policy, what major policy changes or innovations are suggested by this particular set of data that you put together?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm afraid I'm not sure what the answer is. I don't think this data really tells you a policy answer. It just doesn't, right? It just quantifies, how these things are impacting the bills. That's the presentation I'm prepared to give today. I don't mean to be. I'm not ducking a question. It's just I'm not really. The policy conversation is the whole ball game, right? There's all the conversation we're having about rates and solar policies and Mass Save and so forth. This is just the end product of all of those policies as it relates to people's bills, as it relates to what people are paying. And that's the sum total of what the presentation I have today is. If is that's, I hope that's a fair answer. You know, we're going to have a big conversation. There's a big conversation that's coming, big conversation that's been happening in the House about the energy bill and, you know, how they want to adjust things and or not adjust things, what they want to adjust. And haven't really been paying too much attention to that conversation. I'm waiting for it to come across the aisle. And then we will have a conversation in the Senate. And, you know, there'll be some votes that may ultimately, you know, impact some of these numbers, but we're nowhere, we're not there yet.
Pamela?
Thank you, Senator. The more you know about this stuff, the more frustrated we get with the slow pace of legislation to save us from the climate crisis. How do we get the legislators to shift from the distraction, false idea that investing in solar, wind, battery, grid electrification, decarbonization would fall hardest on the people who could least afford to pay the higher energy costs, whereas they don't talk about the costs of the pollution caused by the fossil fuel, which definitely does this. The arguments that are being used to justify doing the wrong thing are economic disasters for us in the future. We got to spend the money on the build out of the green right now because it's already cheaper as well as better and cleaner. And that will trickle down to the most needy. I just read an article about plug-in solar panels that you can hang off apartment balconies. And Chinese have just put a giant wind turbine in the sky floating on Zeppelin technology.
There's lots of great things.
Yeah, that we can't do if we're investing in gas pipelines.
Right. Yeah.
Right. No, there's a lot of great things happening out there. By the way, the governor's bill does include, you know, so this is something we're likely to get done on is the, you know, there's a couple of statutory barriers to those balcony solar things, which, and the governor's bill would remove those barriers. There are still some sort of, you know, insurance standards and national kinds of things we don't quite control, the more industry things that are barriers to getting those installed. But we do want to remove the barriers to those balcony solar things. I think that'll happen this year. Hey, and I just, somebody put in the chat the link to the Henry Hub prices, which was helpful on gas. I hope, in terms of long-term trends, I hope anybody who has a question about the long-term trends in gas prices will look, and I'm just going to throw it back in there. The Henry Hub prices are really, that's a helpful place to look. Henry Hub is like the place that a lot of gas is priced, and you can see the long-term trends, or, you know, you see the long-term fluctuations. It was as high as, if you look at it, you can see it was it bumped as high as $13 in June of 2008. Right now, it's at a bit of a spike. It's at 8, but the overall trend is fluctuation, not increase. Yeah, let's see.
I'm gonna ask you a question that I've looked at, but I don't have the data in front of me. There's been some discussion, quite a bit of discussion about, you know, using distributed clean energy, particularly rooftop solar. And one of the things that you showed us in that pie chart was the contribution that I think it's primarily net metering makes to that light green area of the chart. And the contribution, I believe this is correct, from net metering going back to 2015 to today has, increased pretty dramatically. I think it's, as you would expect, as your amount of rooftop solar increases, the charge that the utilities need to recover for that, providing that retail cost to the customers who have the rooftop solar increases as well. And, back of the envelope calculation suggests that, if we start to get a really significant percentage of our electricity from rooftop solar, that number could increase even more. Other states, particularly California, have, dropped their sort of net metering percent and really focused on having folks have storage associated with their own rooftop solar so that they wouldn't be, paying that retail price. Do you have any comments on, which direction you think we might be going in if we start to get, rooftop solar or other types of net metered solar, to the percent that California has experienced, and whether, the state might take actions as California did?
I hope somebody else on the call can give me more about, the net metering recovery surcharge. It is the biggest portion. So the electric distribution companies, including NSTAR, do recover from all ratepayers the cost of compensating net metering customers. A lot of that goes to the large standalone solar facilities.
It's what, a week old? Oh, come on.
Pam, I'm gonna, sorry.
Yeah, so a lot of that goes to the big solar facilities, and that has remained level the last couple of years, but it did double from 23 to 24. This is complicated. I'm just going to read this to you because it's something that I had to meet with NSTAR to get right. So when customers make a net sale of power back to the grid during a billing period, utilities generally pay them at the full retail rate, and they recoup those costs through the NMRS, through that net metering retail surcharge, which is most of that yellow slice. Now, when customers use solar to merely reduce their energy needs, those bill reductions are recovered through the revenue decoupling charge, which is a separate thing, not the NMRS. For large solar installations, the delivering utility is able to sell the power back to the wholesale market, and the net metering recovery surcharge is reduced by the amount of those sales. For smaller solar facilities, residents and other loads that have their own distributed solar, sales into the wholesale market are infeasible. For these customers, there's no reduction to NMRS to reflect their contributions to the supply. At the current limited scale, the contributions of these small generators are absorbed as reductions in delivery losses. What are delivery losses? Power is lost within the delivery system as a normal reality. Power suppliers always have to buy more power than they are paid for delivering, and they price those expected delivery losses into supply contracts. So if a collection of customers has some small distributed solar installed, then the pricing of power supply to that collection of customers be reduced by the market to reflect the lower net delivery loss for those customers. That's pretty confusing, but that's sort of the current accounting for the NMRS. But that's how the utilities pay for that solar that's generated by rooftop. So to your long-term, to your question, yeah, if there's a whole lot more solar, that charge will go up. But it'd have to be a lot more solar. I mean, that's probably kind of, you might think of this. Oh, so this isn't just rooftop solar. That's another way of pointing. Rooftop solar is a fairly small portion of this big slice because a lot of it is the large utilities. So it would have to be an awfully big increase in rooftop solar to move that needle much. Of course, we all want to have a big increase in rooftop solar. Maybe somebody with more expertise in this area who's on the call can help me out. I see a couple of hands raised. I hope someone's an expert on this.
I'm not an expert, but if somebody is, they can speak up before. I just have a couple of comments. And Mark, are you an expert?
No, but I've talked to some. The governor's proposal cuts this, reduces the net metering rate substantially, in our view, too quickly. But the logic of the situation is that you want to phase that down, and the state policymakers, want to phase that down so that success in adding solar doesn't bankrupt the system. Right now, it goes up in line. The expenditure on the net metering charges go up in direct line with the amount of power that's generated by large solar arrays. So you have to, we would recommend you want to phase it out and move over to the smart incentive program, which has historically been kind of too low and is now being brought up to speed. So and that's a more flexible and more policy-oriented incentive. Anyway, that's where we are now.
That's helpful.
Okay, good.
Yeah. And I just want to say, I think the work that you've done, Senator Brownsberger, is extremely helpful in terms of clarifying issues for me, and I think for others. It's really been very important. I just want to, looking back at your original chart, you don't have to show it again. It really helped me understand that from the consumer's perspective, looking back over the last 4 years, averaging out all of the total increases, it has been about a 50% increase per kilowatt hour that we've seen over that time. So the consumer perspective, as we've heard and seen and experienced ourselves, is a reality. It's a 50% increase in the cost per kilowatt hour of our electricity. And so that's why we're seeing so much pushback. The other observations I really appreciated looking at the average bill, that the environmental costs on average are about $50 a month for the average ratepayer. And part of me sort of feels like my reaction to that is, oh, geez, that's not really very much. So you've helped me really put this into perspective in some very important ways. And the only thought for the future would be if that this supply charge is although natural gas is the critical factor within that, as we start to see solar playing a role in very complicated ways, and hydro and increased amounts of hydro playing a role down the road, it'd be interesting to break that down into the pieces, contributions of gas and our other sources of fuel. But thank you very much for putting this all together for us. It was really great.
Well, thank you for that. And of course, that's you're pointing to another deeper question, and Pamela's questions, speak to that as well as, where can we get with our energy mix? That's what that's what it's all about.
That's right.
I'm just going to glance back to the chart, so some good information coming in here from Pamela. Thanks to all attendees for questions. We do want to be a renewable and a leader in renewable energy. I think we've kind of covered the questions, unless anybody wants to raise their hand and speak out. And you know, it was a fairly, we are, I guess, approaching our end time anyway of 5:30. Arnie, is there anybody else who you want to wrap up?
No, I think we've covered a lot of ground, and thank you very much, Senator Brownsberger. I don't, as I said, for reasons I don't understand, I can't see the chat. I can just see raised hands, but if there's no other questions, I think we can wrap up the discussion now. And you know, I know there was a question earlier on about diving deeper into MLP rates as compared to the rates from the large investor-owned utilities. You know, I think that's probably a discussion worth having. I happen to live in a community served by a municipal light plant where our rates are literally 2.5 times lower than those from Eversource. So it would be interesting to look at, you know, why that differential exists. And I think you did show for Belmont Light, you know, what the major contributions were, but
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to that. But the big things are, you know, the environmental charges are much less. That's a material number. And but also, and even bigger, is the supply charges are less in the same way that the municipal aggregating municipal aggregators are less than Eversource. That supply charge that Eversource has is elevated in part because we limit them to 6-month contracts, whereas municipal light companies and also aggregators, whether they're municipal aggregators, you know, like Cambridge Choice Electric or whatever, those things can enter into longer term contracts, which tend to be cheaper. They help a lot. I just want to say as we close, you know, I was asked to give a presentation about this, these numbers, which are somewhat hard to come by, and I was pleased to give the presentation and to share them. But I just want to acknowledge that they raise, you know, there's sort of an end product, and there's a whole lot of deep policy questions that, you know, go beyond the scope of what we're doing today. But I just respect what everybody had to say about you know, priorities in terms of change.
all right. Well, thanks again. Thanks everybody who joined today. We have been recording the presentation, and it should be available certainly by the end of the week. I will send out a follow-up email to everybody who registered once we've got the video posted. And thanks again to Senator Brownsberger. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you. Take care.
Thank
Thanks
you
for
so
having
much,
me.
Senator. Really appreciate your time.
All right. Bye all.